Welcome to the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie Betts. After learning a ton about kidney stones and helping people prevent stones at the University of Chicago, I was fed up with all the terrible advice people were finding online. So I decided to do something about it. The Kidney Dietitian was born. This podcast is for people who want to learn what actually works to prevent kidney stones and still enjoy life, eating, and their favorite foods. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the 70th episode of the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie Betts, and I am beyond thrilled to have an incredibly special guest on the podcast today, a fellow dietitian and researcher named Annabel Birute. She and I met, I think we actually met in person not that long ago, maybe 9 months ago.
Yeah.
At an FNKF event. But I feel like we've been like Twitter or X or Instagram friends for a while. And I am just so thrilled to have Annabel on the podcast today. So welcome, Annabel.
Thank you so much, Melanie. It is amazing to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you. So let's just start out by introducing yourself. Who are you? Where are you? What do you do? Why are you on this kidney podcast today?
Of course. So I am a registered dietitian, and I like to call myself registered dietitian squared because my training started as in my bachelor's in nutrition and dietetics in Mexico. I did my internship, and then I was a nutrition support dietitian in Mexico while I was applying for grad school. Then I moved to the US and I started my PhD in nutritional sciences at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I there worked with Dr. Ken Weiland, and he did lifestyle interventions in people with kidney failure, primarily those undergoing hemodialysis. And there I was exposed to the world of clinical trials in this heart population. We did protein supplementation, intradialytic cycling. We did a variety of dietary interventions. But then I was really interested in the field of the gut microbiome because at Illinois, there were a lot of people working on that, but not on kidney disease. My dissertation focused on dietary fiber and how that can impact the composition of the microbiome and some of the metabolites that the microbes produce in people undergoing dialysis. I then completely shifted my focus, and I did a postdoc at Indiana University School of Medicine. I trained with Dr. Sharon Moe, who is a world expert in mineral and bone disorder. And I was really, really lucky to get exposure and experience in animal models of kidney disease. And we worked on dietary pharmacological interventions and their impact on mineral and bone disorder, and then also the gut microbiome. And then I started my first position at now Indiana University in Indianapolis. It's so confusing because it used to be IUPUI, Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, but now it's IUI, in the Department of Nutrition and Dietetics before moving here to Purdue as an assistant professor. And my lab is interested in lifestyle interventions as well, but mostly on the dietary components and their impact on gastrointestinal function and the gut microbiome. And I also have a small right now line of research. Hopefully we will start moving it up on health disparities in people from Hispanic and Latino descent in the United States through culturally and language concordant intervention.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know that was a mini side project that you have going on.
Yeah. It's kind of like like I'm trying to nurture it. And so it started.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That's amazing. Thank you so much for that outline of kind of how you got to where you are. And for our listeners, in case you didn't pick up on this, Annabel is a big deal dietitian. She is the go-to, as far as I'm concerned, the go-to researcher and dietitian when it comes to the gut microbiome and kidney disease, which is a super interesting area, both in kidney stones and kidney disease. Annabel works in kidney disease, so we're going to focus definitely on that today, but hopefully in the future I can get some of my contacts to talk a little bit more about kidney stones because there's also a ton of really interesting work going on there as well. But some of the same concepts certainly apply in both kidney disease and kidney stones. So, before we dive into the nitty gritty, for those people who are listening who aren't really sure what you mean when you say gut microbiome, what is the gut microbiome?
That's a really important question, right? Definition of everything that we're going to talk about. So, in very broad terms, the gut microbiota is that diverse community of microorganisms that reside within a niche. In this case, we focus on the gastrointestinal tract. Now, most of the research has been done on bacteria, but the reality is that it's any type of microorganism. Archaea, which once were considered bacteria, fungi, parasites, viruses, everything that is residing within that niche. So it is usually the terms microbiota and microbiome are used interchangeably, but they mean slightly different things. So microbiota is those microorganisms. So who is there? And the microbiome is really everything. Are the genomes, so the functions that they are performing, the metabolites that they're producing, all of the things associated with that specific ecosystem. That very broad thing is the microbiome. So when we're talking about microbes, but also their metabolites, we like to use the term microbiome instead of microbiota.
Mm-hmm. Right. Microbiota is just the bacteria essentially, and microbiome is everything that's going on down there, including what they're doing.
Yeah, so microbiota, bacteria, yes, but all the microorganisms, but only who,
Mm-hmm.
not
Right.
what they're doing, but
Right.
just composition. And
Okay.
microbiome is more broad. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So interesting. I have to say, I forgot to mention that I did my thesis on probiotics and prebiotics way back
Oh,
when at
I
Rush.
didn't know
Yeah, it
that.
was. I did a patient survey, just kind of assessing their knowledge, use, and perceptions of pro and prebiotics way
Oh,
back when.
nice.
Yeah. Of patients who were hospitalized at Rush. So this has been just like a special area of interest. And I truly think it's the most fascinating area of research going on in both kidney disease and kidney stones because these
Mhm.
little guys do so much for us from a
Yeah.
general health standpoint as well as a kidney standpoint. Like it's just like mind blowing to think about, kind of like the solar system. Like it's like beyond comprehension, quite frankly, you know?
And you know it's there, but you don't constantly think what
Right,
exactly they're doing for us.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You'll probably be able to throw the stat out, but do you know off the top of your head how many cells or like how many bacteria are in there versus like how many cells are in my body? I feel like that number is always thrown out
That
as
used to
opposed to
be,
talking.
and now I need to go back to specific numbers, but it used to be thought that it was like 10 times the amount of microorganisms in comparison to the amount of cells in the body. But that was actually without counting um, blood cells. So it was actually not
Oh,
really a straight comparison. But now I think we're more to one. So it is
still
still,
fascinating.
still fascinating. Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
you
yes.
have essentially just as many bacteria and other microorganisms,
Microorganisms,
and that's
yeah.
just in your gut, right? That doesn't even include
It
like
is
the urobiome and
It is
yeah,
mostly,
yeah,
yeah. And I
yeah.
mean, I think it's hard also to understand really because it varies depending on the site of the gut that you are at. Obviously, the
Mhm.
large intestine will have the highest density, but it's still all over. So especially if we count the mouth and then every
It's
single part of
yeah,
the GI tract.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And there is such variation as we're learning, like massive differences between each person with the number of bacteria and whatnot down there and the
Hmm.
types, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about later.
Yeah.
But so before we dive into kidney stuff specifically, can you give us kind of an idea, like general health, like what are all of the things that those bacteria do? Because I don't think people realize, like we know probiotics are good for you and like we need to have a healthy gut microbiome, but like what does that even mean? Like what do they do for us? What are like the biggest functions of the gut microbiome?
They do so much. So there's different characteristics, like we mentioned, like depending on the type of or the site of the gut, that we can focus on the specific functions. But just very broadly speaking, they are related to nutritional homeostasis and metabolic homeostasis. And that's why it's so important, particularly in the area of nutrition research. They can produce several types of vitamins, including B vitamins and vitamin K2. So
Mm-hmm.
those are highly relevant. It is hard to quantify really the proportion of these vitamins are coming from the microbes versus those that we consume from diet, but it's an important proportion. Some people have mentioned about 10 to 15%. They are also related to the digestion and absorption of some of the nutrients that we consume. So I study dietary fiber, and we know that dietary fiber is a nutrient for health, but a lot of the health potential of that dietary fiber is related to how the microbes metabolize that dietary fiber. Another thing, they can produce several metabolites that can have actions within the GI tract, but also they can be absorbed and circulate through blood to distal tissues. So it's kind of like considered a virtual endocrine organ. Virtual because we cannot see it to the naked eye, and endocrine because they can have action in distal tissues. We're talking about the brain, we're talking about the heart, we're talking about the bone, we're talking about the muscle. So
Literally
really,
everything.
those everything,
Yeah.
all of those metabolites can have beneficial or detrimental impact, and that is one of the main concepts within the gut microbiome, is that it's context dependent.
Hmm.
So metabolites could be very good in one context or very bad in another context, and that's what we will talk with kidney disease, that a lot of these things that are traditionally considered beneficial could be detrimental in the context
Hmm.
of kidney disease.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so complicated.
So
I
complicated,
think
yes.
I'm biased. I don't know. Maybe it's because I don't understand it, certainly to the level you do, but I feel like it is one of the most complicated areas of research because there's no good or bad, as you just described, right? Like some things are good in some
Mhm.
cases and bad in other cases. And I imagine there's amounts, like you want to have not too much of some of the metabolites. And right, like it's so complicated. And so when people say, what's a good microbiome, that is literally impossible to answer for so
I'm so glad that
many
you're mentioning
reasons.
this, because even in any type of disease context, we talk about dysbiosis, and just the word dysbiosis means away from normal or a
Mhm.
distance from normal, but we don't know what
What is
normal is.
normal?
So what is dysbiosis?
Right.
Like exactly, like it's usually just like within any context of disease, you talk about this shift in metabolism, more like the function.
Hmm.
It's kind of easier to think about it that way, like away from like normal metabolites in the
Hmm.
context of that specific disease. But yeah,
Yeah.
we don't know
Yeah.
what a normal microbiome. Normal
And
microbiome for me is normal for you, normal
right.
for somebody living in Mexico, somebody
Right.
living in Africa, etc.
Yeah. And I imagine that ideal is even a whole nother impossible definition, right? Like I imagine it may be different than normal, but ideal is also going to be different based on who you are, your medical history, and so many factors that we don't even know.
Yeah, and there was actually just one paper published that I still need to go through, but it's a consortium of researchers across the world trying to come with an idea of what a healthy
Oh,
microbiome is,
yeah.
and they're getting more to the fact of what types of functions should we be
Mm,
looking into all of these very big collective studies and integrating that data to get kind of like a better idea of what that is, what that
yeah.
means, and
So
if
not
it's
it.
meaningful too.
Yeah, so not exactly you need to have this many million of this bacteria, but we're looking more at what are those bacteria actually doing, which makes a lot of sense
Exactly.
because there are so many thousands of different types of bacteria down there
Mm-hmm.
and so many millions of them. Like it would be impossible to quantify for a person. So it makes a lot of sense to define it based on what they're actually doing.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
one bacteria could be doing different functions depending on the environment that they're
right,
living in,
right.
the type of substrates that they're having access to. So yeah.
So complicated, so many things to
Hmm.
consider. And I think you use the word dysbiosis, and that immediately brought up kind of a red flag of a way to maybe identify some misinformation that you might see, say, on Instagram or other places online. Like if anyone's saying like, "Oh, this you have dysbiosis because of this XYZ, and you need to take my product," right? Like that's a red flag. They have no idea. We can't even define dysbiosis. So I don't know if you want to comment on that a little bit, but that
I
that
think,
thought popped
yeah,
in my head.
I completely agree. I think the amount of information that we currently have through our different sources of where we consume that information, it's just so complicated and so complex. There's a lot of people popping in into, I'm a gut health expert. Let's sequence your microbiome and give you a specific diet based on that and give you a specific supplement based on that. The reality is that what we currently have available, it shouldn't be giving you that direct to consumer things yet.
We can't do that.
I
The
think
research isn't advanced,
no, the
basically.
research isn't there yet. It's not individualized. A lot of this studies are large studies, and when we're trying to adapt the data from big studies to an individual, it is hard. It's not there.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So much good information already. Now let's move into kidneys.
Yes.
So you already did a great job of explaining how the gut microbiome influences every tissue, really, in our entire body. But when we think about kidneys specifically, what are those bacteria doing for our kidney health or non-kidney health?
Yeah. So there are a lot of things. So I like to think about the directionality of the relationship. So kidney disease impacting the gut microbes, but also the gut microbes impacting kidney disease.
Mhm.
So when we think about kidney disease impacting the gut microbes, there's so many things that are occurring. One, because there's a loss of kidney function, there's an accumulation of a lot of things, including metabolic waste products, primarily nitrogenous waste products. Those nitrogenous waste products, they're very abundant in blood, and they're such tiny molecules that they can diffuse into the lumen of the gut.
Mhm.
So because it can diffuse to the lumen of the gut, some of the microbes that can metabolize those nitrogenous waste products, thinking about creatinine, uric acid, urea, those are the ones that increase. So the relative abundance of those microbes that can utilize nitrogenous waste product increase. And usually those microbes tend to be more on the pathogenic side. So they produce more gut-derived uremic toxins, and we already have an environment that has too many uremic toxins in general. So it contributes to even more. But then we also have all of the things that we do to patients with chronic kidney disease. So we have medication, we have a specific dietary treatments, we have a lack of physical activity. So all of these things in concert can impact the composition and the function of the gut microbiome. Some of the things that have been tested in actual studies, including in vitro, experimental, and clinical studies, are, for example, phosphate binders. Phosphate binders can impact the composition and the function of the microbiome. If we think about calcium-based binders and specifically iron-based binders, they can impact, but also the non-specific phosphate-based binders like sevelamer, for example. Then we also have the diet. And we know, I mean, it's so complicated, but in general, if we think about the traditional renal diet, it is usually leading patients to consume lower concentrations or lower amounts of plant-based foods and therefore lower diversity and quantity of dietary fiber. And because of this, usually that relates to the composition and the function of the gut microbiome. We also have inflammation. And that inflammation could also trigger changes in the function of the gut, including intestinal permeability. And that but lower or impaired intestinal permeability can lead the translocation of these microorganisms or their products, contributing to more inflammation.
Hmm.
Now, when we think about the microbiome impacting the development of kidney disease, there is some evidence that particularly experimental studies, when they completely take out the gut microbiome, so it's a germ-free environment, they have better kidney function, but it really depends. They produce less of these beneficial metabolites like short-chain fatty acids, which are derived from the fermentation of dietary fiber, but they also produce less of the gut-derived uremic toxins. So these metabolites, particularly from amino acids like tryptophan, tyrosine, leading to indoles and phenols and picrosyl and things like that. So they could develop less kidney function in this very, very experimental animal model.
Hmm.
But if they trigger kidney disease and then they add microbes, the relationship is a little bit trickier. So
Interesting.
there seems to be that relationship between the microbes leading to more or less kidney disease.
Hmm. Okay. That was a lot. In a nutshell.
Yes.
In a nutshell, when you have kidney disease, the buildup of uremic toxins is making the gut bacteria less healthy overall, we think, right?
Usually, yeah.
And then because and it's sort of a vicious cycle, right? So then also that less healthy gut microbiome is potentially impacting the progression of kidney disease. Is that correct?
Yeah. And then, yeah, if we think about these gut-derived uremic toxins, one factor obviously is the production. So it's coming from the microbes.
Hmm.
But then because we have impaired kidney function, a lot of these toxins are protein-bound uremic toxins. So they really need the kidneys to be excreted. So
Hmm.
because kidney function is lower, the
You can't.
excretion of these molecules is less.
Yeah.
So there's more
Real vicious cycle.
accumulation.
Hmm.
Real vicious cycle. So a lot of the therapies is really trying to limit the production
Yeah.
of these microbes to contribute to less of the accumulation in blood.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, do you think, or is there any research that looks at the role of lower protein diets in all of this? Like, do you think that one of the reasons that we often see better outcomes in patients with kidney disease who are eating less protein in general, is it part, I mean, obviously there's lots of things going on, but potentially it could be because it's helping slow this vicious cycle a little bit less because you're eating less protein, you're going to have less uremic toxins, et cetera, et cetera.
I completely see that. There is clinical trials, and there is several countries where low protein diets have been utilized for so long.
Hmm.
Countries in Latin America, and particularly European countries. I'm going to talk about Italy
Hmm.
because they've done the low protein diet for so long. They've shown in multiple clinical trials that a low protein diet leads to less production of these gut-derived uremic toxins.
Hmm.
And when we think about a low protein diet, obviously the only thing protein is not the only thing that is modulated
Hmm.
because you're consuming less protein, you're adding also more carbohydrates, more fat. And when you're adding more carbohydrates, a lot of the foods are actually fruits.
Hmm.
So a lot of those fruits also contain dietary fiber. So it's a
Yeah.
lower of the concentration or the substrate for the gut-derived uremic toxins, but also adding the diversity and quantity of dietary fiber to suppress that production in the gut.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like a dual benefit. It's less protein, but also more fiber.
Yeah.
Not automatically, but usually more fiber.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. If you're working with a dietitian and doing it right, right?
exactly. Yes. I know that this is a very, very what is it? What's the word that I'm looking for?
Pro
Contrasting topic in
oh,
the field of nephrology, particularly if you ask nephrologists. Low protein diets don't work, but nuance.
yeah. Yeah. And I really uh think especially for most people, like I think in order to get down to a truly low protein diet for most people is so unbelievably difficult. I'm not sure it's feasible. However, I love the idea of swapping in more plant protein foods, beans, nuts, seeds, lentils, tofu, etc., because that likely will lower your total protein intake. But we also know from a totally different standpoint that eating these more plant-based proteins are going to help with acidosis, likely less available, less absorbed potassium and phosphorus,
Mhm.
but likely also, I don't even think about this as a benefit often, like when I list the benefits, but also there's potential benefit for not only the fiber in those plant foods to help the gut microbiome, but also the lower production of uremic toxins helping the
Mhm.
gut microbiome as well.
Yeah. Yeah, completely agree. And
Mhm.
like you said, like low protein diets are nuanced. And I think just thinking about the high levels of protein consumption in the US, everything is relative. Even if we do a small
Yes.
drop, it's probably going to provide a benefit. I
Hmm.
think that I mean, it's not really related to the gut microbiome, but it's renal nutrition. And I love talking about renal
Yeah.
nutrition. So I think it's very similar to with sodium. Like it's not getting to the 1500 milligrams per day, but it's really the relative
Moving it.
reduction for a
Hmm.
person that will provide the benefit. Yeah.
Right, right. I talk about that a lot with kidney stone prevention and drinking more water. Like even if you don't get to our goal, like I like to say 3 liters of urine output per day. Technically, the guidelines say 2.5, but
Two
like
and a half.
even if you
Yeah.
don't get there, like if you get from 1 to 1.5 liters, like that's amazing, and that is going to do a huge service for you to reduce your stone risk. And same thing with sodium or protein or eating more fiber or whatever it is, right?
Hmm.
Like even if you don't hit that goal, if you're doing more, you're doing wonders for your health.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we've covered that the gut microbiome is incredibly important, and we're learning more and more every day about how both kidney disease impacts the microbiome and how the microbiome impacts kidney disease. So now the big question, what can we do about it, right? I think people immediately will think probiotics. Well, I should take a probiotic to help my gut microbiome be better for my kidneys. So what are your
Mhm.
thoughts on that?
I think that in an ideal world, it would be a food approach. It would be trying to increase the intake of all of these foods that will provide several benefits to our microbes. Thinking about mostly plant-based foods because these are containing a variety of dietary fibers and also more quantity of dietary fiber. I tend to think about dietary fiber because that's my area of research, but it's also several other benefits. It includes also polyphenols that can be utilized by the gut microbes. It could contain antioxidants and anti-inflammatory components. So it's a real benefit. Then we move from that ideal world in which we are increasing the plant-based food consumption. We get to the gut-oriented therapies, which are usually prebiotics, probiotics, and symbiotics. And just to give you like a pretty, very, very brief overview, probiotics are those live microorganisms that are provide a benefit in specific quantities to the host, in this case, a person. Prebiotics are the substrates for usually commensal bacteria, which are those microbes living within our guts. And then symbiotics are usually the combination of a prebiotic and a probiotic.
Mhm.
If we go into the evidence, which ones are likely to produce a benefit, I think on top are the prebiotics, so the substrates for the microbes, and the symbiotics that contain the prebiotic and the probiotic. And then on the lower one is also it's the probiotics. Why? Again, it's really context dependent. With the probiotics, a lot of the strains that we currently have available are usually lactobacillus and bifidobacteria. Lactobacillus are the ones that have been probably studied the most in the context of kidney disease. And if you look at the results, some are beneficial, some are not beneficial.
Mhm.
And I think we need to take a closer look at why they may not be beneficial. And if we think about these strains, some of these strains have the capacity of producing gut-derived uremic toxins. So they have the genes available to produce those toxins derived from amino acids.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it a broad range. Lactobacillus can have a enzyme called tryptophanase, which converts the tryptophan to the indoles and then the indole to indoxyl sulfate, which is one of the gut-derived uremic toxins. And that's something that it's not talked about a lot.
Mhm.
So a lot of people are like, when they see the negative results, it's like, oh, it's probably because it was a small sample size. Probably. A lot of the studies have relatively small sample sizes. A probiotic should be beneficial for everybody. I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting.
It also depends. Yeah, so go ahead.
I often think, oh, probiotics aren't great because they aren't going to get to where we need them to go, right? Like you
Mm,
need to be taking such large doses, correct me if I'm wrong, to survive the acidic stomach to get down to your
mhm.
intestines, which is where we really need those bacteria to go. So that's
That could be
my
another thing
immediate
too.
thought. Yeah.
I mean, some of the newer probiotics try to microencapsulate so they can
Get
really
through.
get to the large intestine.
Hmm.
But still, those formulations have not provided a pretty significant benefit
Hmm.
to people with chronic kidney
Yeah. There's
disease.
more
So
than
I'm
that going
still a
on.
little bit more careful with probiotics, but because I do think that some probiotic strains could be actually detrimental for
Hmm.
people with kidney disease, and we need to get to the point that we can recommend specific strains, and
Yeah.
that's in the field of probiotics. Look for the specific strain to the specific outcome that you want to.
Yeah.
So the outcomes could be lowering gut-derived uremic toxins, lowering urea, lowering creatinine,
Hmm.
etc., or improving GI symptoms, or other things, improving the
Yeah.
composition of the gut microbiome. So it really depends on the
Yeah.
outcome.
Can you share with the audience which of those strains of bacteria could potentially increase those uremic toxins that
It
you just
is,
mentioned?
yeah, it would be more on the lactobacillus. So I don't want to generalize all lactobacilli, but some of the lactobacillus strains
Okay.
could potentially increase the
Mhm.
gut-derived uremic toxins. And I can share with you, it was a paper published in now 2015, so it's almost 10 years. I can't believe it. I still have it in my slides of the yin and the yang of probiotics, and thinking
Mhm.
about that the probiotics can actually also increase inflammation instead of decreasing,
Yeah.
but it's in
Yeah.
the context of the uremic milieu.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Fascinating. All right. So
yeah,
probiotics, maybe some
right.
promise, but
Yeah.
we need a whole heck of a lot more research. And there is potential for harm, especially in patients with kidney disease, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The other ones are more on the prebiotic side of things, so
Hmm.
more on the substrate to the commensal
Yeah.
microbes. And
So that's
most of
for
these,
layman's terms, that's prebiotics is basically a food to feed the gut bacteria that are hanging out in your intestine. So we can
yes,
really help foster and help the good bacteria grow essentially with a prebiotic.
that is the thought process. Yes.
Yes.
And most of these are carbohydrates and dietary fibers or prebiotic fibers, but there's also some others that are non-specific carbohydrates. But I'm going to focus more on the dietary fiber, the prebiotic fibers.
Hmm.
And these are other term is fermentable dietary fibers. Fermentable because they are fermented by the gut microbes, and usually they produce beneficial metabolites that are called short chain fatty acids. And those short chain fatty acids are really relevant because some of them are used as primary source of energy for the main cells in the intestine, but also they can be absorbed and then have beneficial impacts in different organs and systems.
Hmm.
So some of these are very, very available now in the food supply. So we're talking about inulin and fructans and pectins and other types of fibers. So when you look into the systematic reviews and the meta-analyses, they tend to be more favorable of outcomes, but they're still like a little bit tricky. Some of the evidence is not the best quality. So there are a lot of small sample size studies, but they have shown some benefits for different outcomes, including lowering those gut-derived uremic toxins. And then the other ones are the symbiotics, which are the combination between the prebiotic and the probiotic. And also those tend to be a little bit more beneficial, very similar to the prebiotic. So in my probably biased opinion, I think the prebiotic is driving that beneficial effect. The probiotics in the study, sometimes they use multiple strains. Like there's one study that was performed in Australia that used, I think, 9 strains of probiotics. And then I think coupled with 3 prebiotic fibers. And they showed improvements in gut-derived uremic toxins, less gastrointestinal distress, etc. So yeah.
So, so it sounds like prebiotics, there's a lot more promising research that has found actual outcomes with patients. Primarily, it sounds like lower inflammation, lower uremic toxins, lower GI symptoms, less I imagine constipation, abdominal pain, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
one of the things that actually I think it's good with the symbiotics is that when you increase the fermentation or the microbes are fermenting, they're producing gas. And that could be translated into more bloating. And some people may refer this bloating as uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And therefore, the probiotic actually coupling with a probiotic,
Mm.
it's beneficial because maybe those microbes are helping in lowering or
Yeah,
utilizing those gases that are produced. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Fascinating. Um, so it seems like the biggest thing that people with kidney disease can do, given where the research is today on November 13th, 2024, um, is eat, get more fiber in to help those bacteria be healthy, essentially, to help promote the life and growth of those good bacteria, right?
Yeah. And if I could like yes, start with foods. If you're already having a suboptimal dietary fiber intake, try to get it at least to the recommendations. We don't have a kidney disease specific recommendation for dietary fiber, but probably between 25 and 30 grams of fiber per day would be good. And if
Mhm.
you're consuming those amounts of fiber from mostly plant-based foods and a variety of plant-based foods, you're going to have also a variety of dietary fibers that the gut microbes love. So that probably will lead to a gut health benefit in
Mhm.
those regards. Yeah.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
addition to all of the other
In
benefits that we
addition to
focus on.
all of the other
Yeah.
benefits of eating
It's
those.
just a bonus.
Endless, yes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because another thing I kind of learned today, maybe I've learned at some point in my life, but forgot, is that those gut bacteria love like polyphenols and antioxidants and other anti-inflammatory things that you find in the exact same foods that you're going to be getting the fiber from. So there's a whole lot of benefits. For your gut microbiome and kidney health in general, but specifically the gut microbiome for eating plant foods.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we say plant foods, can you help our listeners understand a little bit about what are those? Like what are plant foods?
So the plant foods are primarily your fruits and vegetables. So your fruits are going to be giving you a lot of these prebiotic fibers, which are also divided like soluble dietary fibers. I like to think it more on the fermentability and the viscosity potential, but fruits are going to give you a lot of the soluble fiber, fermentable fibers. Your vegetables are going to give you a lot of the insoluble fiber, like cellulose is just that plant cell wall that can increase the bulk. And increasing the bulk also increases bowel movements. So, one of the main problems that we have with people with kidney disease is also constipation. So, if we increase the amount of both these fermentable, viscous prebiotic fibers and the insoluble fibers, that could probably translate into a benefit into reducing constipation. But we also have some others, legumes, pulses, whole grains that will also give you a lot of these soluble and insoluble dietary fiber that could therefore give you the GI benefit.
Hmm.
Nuts and seeds also contain a lot of insoluble dietary fiber,
Hmm.
a lot of vitamins and minerals, all of these foods really, vitamins, minerals, and all in general. So this would be probably
Yeah.
the primary plant-based foods. Yeah.
Yep. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and plant
Right.
proteins.
Nuts, seeds,
Yep.
legumes. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And I just have to say, I imagine that there may be a lot of alarms going off in people's heads, potassium, phosphorus, oxalate potentially. I did a
Mm-hmm.
wonderful podcast with Jen Hernandez a couple or 2 months ago or so. So definitely check that out. We talked a lot about how maybe limiting potassium and phosphorus in these plant foods isn't best. And if you've been around me for more than 5 minutes, you know how I feel about a low oxalate diet. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we talk about eating more plant foods, I have to give those disclaimers because I'm always going to get some hate in the comments about how in the
Yeah.
world can we recommend this. So just wanted to mention that.
But with the dietary potassium and the phosphorus, I mean, I think, at least in my view, one of the great benefits I tend to think my short career in renal nutrition, even though I've been here for about 12 years,
Adds up. Yeah.
it's
It goes quick.
really that fast evolution of how our messaging has changed for
It's
the
people.
benefit of the people and the patients.
Yes.
And one of probably the biggest benefits right now that we're still learning is the bioaccessibility of nutrients and specifically micronutrients like phosphorus and potassium. Knowing that the bioaccessibility is lower in these plant-based foods now, still nuanced because it depends on how you cook them, where you're obtaining them, etc. But it's still low or
Hmm.
lower than some other counterparts, which will be either ultra processed foods with additives or even animal based foods.
Hmm.
So I think that's a dual benefit.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It is a fascinating time. We are two very biased people here on this podcast today, but I think that it is a very fascinating time to be
Mm-hmm.
a renal dietitian because it has changed. I think we are about the same age, so we graduated at about the same time. And like it's totally different than when we were in school, not really that long ago, right? So, um,
I mean, you were probably taught like the energy balls and how you did the renal
oh
diet. It
yeah,
was basically
absolutely.
with
Like,
sugar and butter and sugar
hmm,
and oil.
yeah,
So that
absolutely.
was the only way that you could do a low protein diet because, of course, you have to give adequate energy. So the
Right,
only
right. There's
thing was
nothing you
just
can eat,
adding
so you just have to
sugar
give them
and
butter.
butter. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating how it's changed so much, and I think kidney stones is also changing. It's a bit behind kidney disease, in my opinion, but I think
Hmm.
that it's coming soon. Like we're just understanding more about how food impacts kidneys in general,
Hmm.
not just nutrients. For so long, no matter what we're talking about for kidney health, it's been reduced to we tell patients to eat less sodium, potassium, phosphorus, protein, right? Or oxalate, whatever, depending on what you're talking about. Um, but we now have data that shows that really that could be harmful, asking people to limit these things. And I'm excited because I think we're moving towards, this is something I say all the time. I feel like cardiology has done a great public health, they have a great public health message. Everyone knows what a heart healthy diet is, right? We think
Hmm.
olive oil, fish, beans, nuts, seeds, berries, whatever. But when you think heart or a kidney friendly diet, like
Hmm.
people are going to come up short, right? There's no foods that come to mind. We think nutrients. And that's really
Hmm.
making it very difficult for people to figure out what to eat, because there's no messages of which foods and dietary patterns are good for kidneys. And I'm working tirelessly to change that. So,
Yeah, and also the bad thing is that we have so many mixed messages that
yes.
we still have. Like even if you just Google stuff, it's just like eat this, but not this, but yes this.
And
So it's
also
just
with
so
no mention of like
confusing.
what stage kidney disease. Do you even have high potassium? Like
Exactly.
you have diabetes, like oh, so many things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. So any final thoughts? We talked about so many things today. I don't even know where to go. So any final thoughts that you want to leave our audience with today?
so I think the area of the gut microbiome is so interesting, so exciting, but it's still kind of like a baby. We still need to learn a lot. We still need to learn what is a benefit for the patient and how we can actually modulate the microbes in order to produce a benefit. I think right now it's flashy research, interesting research, but really the end, it's does it translate to a benefit to the patient?
Hmm.
Can it improve the patient's quality of life? I
Yeah.
think that's a little bit where the research is going, and I'm really hopeful for what we will find in this area. I think it's still very nuanced, and I think it will be continue to be nuanced. Everything will be context dependent, but
Hmm.
hopefully at some point we will get to the right intervention for the right person for the right outcome.
Yeah.
So we'll
Do you
see.
feel hopeful that we'll get there in like 10 years, 20 years in our lifetime? Do you think?
Like the ability to measure and quantify outcomes in the microbiome is evolving so fast that maybe. Like
Okay.
the methods that I used during my PhD, which I finished in 2017, are obsolete right now. And it's not even 10 years.
Hmm.
So I think that the area is moving really, really fast.
Yeah.
But hopefully we will keep what's important in mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
patient, patient
Hmm.
outcomes.
Right. Right. And not just,
Yeah.
yeah, what happens in
Flashy
their
outcomes.
house.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so, so much for being on the podcast today, Annabelle. This was a pleasure and I learned a ton. I'm sure our listeners will have learned a ton. If people want to get a hold of you, is there any way that people can?
So I do my LinkedIn page. I have a Annabel Birute, and I also have the same in. I keep saying Twitter because to me it
I
will
do
be
too.
always
It's just
Twitter.
weird. I know.
X. I don't have Instagram yet, but I'm hoping to get a little bit more to get more messaging directly to individuals. But probably LinkedIn and my X page will be
Okay.
the best way.
Awesome, awesome. And I'll link to those in the show notes so people can follow you if they want to. And thank you so much to our listeners, as always, for tuning in to the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. And I hope to see you again next Wednesday. Thank you for listening to today's episode. For more help with kidney stones, check out my website, www.thekidneydietitian.org. For more personalized help from me, check out my online course, Kidney Stone Nutrition School. VIP enrollment includes help directly from me. I can't wait to see you there and help you prevent kidney stones. Have a great day.